To Press Coverage, part of the Going for Two Live network. I'm your host, Kyle Senra, and this week's guest is Andrew Hall from a few places, Fantasy Pros, Pro Football Network, and now recently the co-host of Dynasty Junkies. So, Andrew, welcome to the pod, and I guess welcome to the podcast hosting world now.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate the welcome. It's a long time overdue. I feel like I've done a lot of podcasts. It was about time I kind of picked a team and joined up with someone and really look forward to seeing what we can do with the Junkies brand.
That's real awesome. And I mean, glad you're still able to guest and it's not keeping you too busy because I do really appreciate you coming on. You and I haven't really had a chance to talk voice to voice, but messaged a lot recently and gotten to know each other. So I thought this would be a great episode to have and introduce you to the rest of the world or whoever's watching here on the Going for Two Live network. So welcome, Andrew, and thanks for joining.
No, my pleasure.
So I guess again, everything's football. We could see it right behind you, the Ocho Cinco jersey. So I think you can guess what your team is, but when did football fascination start with you?
Well, so I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. Both of my parents went to the Ohio State University. So from a young age, we were big college football fans. Big OSU Michigan games. We had a bunch of different tickets to the OSU games over the years. So I grew up kind of a college fan in Columbus. My favorite team as a kid was probably Joe Montana and the Niners. Born in 1981, the 80s and 90s were kind of, were my formative years in football. So I grew up a Niners fan. And then I went to school at UC here in Cincinnati. And when I moved here, I was like, well, I might as well become a Bengals fan. I mean, it's the local team. I guess it's the best I can do. And growing up, obviously, the Niners beat the Bengals in a Super Bowl. So I wasn't necessarily an anti-fan of the Bengals or like a hater. But I always thought that the Bengals were kind of the cooler option, I guess, between them and the Browns. So when I moved here in 2000, became a Bengals fan pretty much right then. And so, it was hard not to be at that point. And it was nice to have a team I could latch myself onto. So yeah, it was probably around 2000 I started being a Bengals fan.
And I could say you stuck to your stripes and stayed with them.
I did, yeah. And actually I moved to Chicago for a few years and didn't really become a Bears fan and stayed a Bengals fan and then moved back to the Cincinnati area. And I was like, okay, good. I'm back where my people are. So it felt good.
I was going to say, as a Packers fan, that's a good choice not rooting for the Bears.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, those years for the Bears are always kind of tough to root for anyway. They've always had a little bit of a brutal time, but it was that Jay Cutler and Brandon Marshall years. Like they had some talent, but just couldn't put it together. And then at the end, it was I was kind of over it anyway. And I was like, well, thank goodness I'm still a Bengals fan, even though that had its own strategy, its own problems, issues all over the place. So yeah, Bengals aren't necessarily a prime franchise. Let's put it that way.
It's funny. Well, Bengals, Bears, both bringing babies, we'll say, into the NFL, young quarterbacks, Burrow last year, Fields this year. So both, looking bright in that sense. I know I said it last year and I'll say it again this year. I think the Bears are definitely the biggest threat to the Packers in the division, and they got better at quarterback. So it would continue to be that big threat, time. I think. So
yeah,
I'm a little more worried than I have been for the last couple of years in that sense, at least from the Bears perspective. So looking up for the Bears, unfortunately for me and Packers fans and Vikings fans, I'm sure aren't happy about it either.
Oh, yeah, and as a Packers fan, you've had a heck of an offseason, right? Lots of drama, lots of what ifs and unknowns. So yeah, it's been a fun one for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll plug the non-Going for Two show. Sorry, Jeff, but Full Press Packers pod this week by co-host Jesse and I was kind of took some victory laps on it. We were kind of feeling he would play for the Packers most of the season. Was I know the sports book pulled things at the end. Is like, oh, is he retiring? Oh no, he's coming back. So now they actually have to up the totals. They didn't want to get screwed on the other side, but their totals were too low. So I feel like it. And maybe I was a little guilty of it too. There's one league where I sent out a couple of Rodgers offers that I wouldn't have made, like Rodgers and a third for Stafford, right? Like I kind of panicked a little, like, oh, should I get out now? And I mean, he got rejected. So that manager was thinking not the case, and now I'm pretty happy it didn't go through. So maybe I'm guilty a little bit of panicking, but I think everyone kind of overreacted that one piece of news. Oh, they're pulling the games. It must be because he's retired. No one considered the alternative. Oh, that he's actually like legit coming, and we know that. So it's a lesson, right? Like not always drawing the conclusion that everyone's drawing from a particular topic happening. Anyway, I'm rambling, so I don't know what you think about that.
No, it's good to stick to your guns. If you got a feeling, go with it, right? If your gut says he's staying and you kind of hang on to that, it's nice to see it come through. Yeah, it's a good feeling.
Okay, so good feelings with, again, football. You obviously, if you enjoy it, it must bring you some joy. I was going to say,
Yeah.
especially as a Bengals fan, you must love football.
Yep. I love the
Uh,
game. I don't always love the team and the franchise. They are turning it around, but yeah, it's been a more of a love of the game and the sport at this point. All right, and it's fair.
Actually, in a bit of controversy in the draft, Bengals wise, there's a lot of controversy with a lot of teams, but the decision to go with Chase instead of the offensive tackle. And I know I remember on the live stream going for two, I kind of called it. I was like, I'm pretty sure they're going Chase, and everyone was kind of staunch on no, they should go. They go with the tackle. There's a few good ones, pick your favorite and take it. So, what were your thoughts? Did you have a player in mind that you really wanted for the Bengals?
So I wanted all of them. I don't know how to answer that. Right? It's like I think what I wanted was both. I wanted to have my cake and eat it too. I do think that probably starting around right at the end of the season, like December, January. I think we all kind of thought we're going to go lineman. It's going to be a clear. We have to go lineman. It's the obvious choice. There's no one else in this draft that might even make sense. But then as we got closer to the draft, and I saw Chase was there, and I was like, well, Chase would be interesting, and he's rising up the draft boards. Like, we're not going to get him in the second. The Bengals don't generally trade back, so I'm like, well, it's either going to be at 5 or nothing. And so I was like, well, let me think this through for a second. And as we got closer and closer and heard more and more coming out about Sewell, I was like, man, I got to be honest. I don't know if Sewell's the guy. He doesn't seem very flexible. He doesn't seem very willing to be a right guard. He was kind of pretty much saying staunchly, like, hey, I'm right tackle as I'm sticking with my position. And it rubbed me the wrong way, to be honest. I was like, man, I don't know about that. And then after listening to some other smart Bengals fans and listening to a bunch of other really good podcasts kind of about the draft and about the NFL outside of fantasy even, there are a lot of people kind of got in my brain that were like, the cutoff, the difference, let's say, in talent from Chase to every other wide receiver is huge. I mean, he was the clear-cut number one. I would say the clear-cut number one, even to Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle and some of those other guys. I thought it was a no-brainer that Chase was the best talent in this draft. He didn't get the Heisman because he didn't play, right? And there's a whole bunch of question marks about that. But reuniting him with Burrow, that's kind of given him a leg up. He doesn't have as much to adapt to or adjust to. He's used to catching the ball from him, so that all helps out. And then again, the talent discrepancy between Sewell and the other offensive tackles or offensive guards or any of the offensive linemen really was more negligible than I thought. So as much as people want to say they should have taken Sewell got passed on by a lot of teams. There are other teams, like even the Dolphins, for instance, that needed an offensive line help that passed on him for Waddle, right? So like that, to me, that says something. Like he wasn't necessarily the top slam dunk pick that everybody thought he was. Just because he's the best on a lot of boards doesn't mean he's worth taking in the fifth, with the first overall kind of pick for the team. And then we got Jackson Carman. We got a couple of other guys. I feel like we did a lot. We got Riley Reif, in the offseason. So, like, we did a little bit, I think, more than people expected, really, to help the offensive line. And I think Chase helps the team entirely, right? Where it's like that Chase is going to make that whole team click. It's going to make it hum. It's going to make the defense have to respect another person that can't load the box. That helps the offensive line, right? So, like, it all kind of comes to play together. And I do think as the draft came in, I was with you. I'm like, it's going to be Chase. I didn't want it to be until about, 10 days before the draft. And then I kind of came around and I'm like, that would be pretty cool. So I'm happy with Chase for sure.
Seems like, I don't know, I've heard a lot of podcasts, a lot of sources talk about stacking this year more so than just in best ball, like in Dynasty, trying that. I did that with Carson Wentz and Michael Pittman in a league. That's not looking so good today. But don't stack Carson Wentz. That was the fault there. Stack the good players. But it seems like the NFL thought that in the draft, right? Stacking Chase with Burrow, stacking Waddle with Tua, stacking Smith with Hurts, former teammates all reuniting. And so I guess I wonder if fantasy is translating to NFL a little.
I think it kind of is. I mean, I think the way that COVID has gone too, and the lack of practices and the weird offseason last year and the kind of uncertain offseason we're looking at this year, I think that there are just a lot of it lined up, which I'll be honest was weird, right? It wasn't like that was planned, but a lot of it just sort of hit. Where you've got like 4 or 5 teams I think that have QB receiver combos, depending on how you look at it, going back into the college days. So yeah, I think it is interesting, but I also think again it's kind of like a shortcut maybe. They're used to the vernacular. We need to get these guys on the field now, and I think coaches have a shorter leash than ever. So it kind of makes sense if you're a coach, like, well, what's the easiest way for me to get somebody on the field and get them to produce in week 1 instead of waiting until week 10 or year 2 or whatever. Coaches don't have that kind of time, right? I mean, there are coaches now. I think there are probably 10 coaches this year that are on the hot seat, and there's 10 every year. It feels like. I mean, it may not always be the same 10. So that just means you got to get in, you got to get your guys, and you got to go quick. And I think that's what we're starting to see.
And probably including Zach Taylor in that hot seat list. So it does make sense to him to go get Chase right away instead of wait for Sewell to develop.
Yeah, no, and I think too with the offensive line that we've had a lot of injuries, and so maybe it was like, well, let's just break that train. Let's get off our normal. Let's do something different. Let's go get a talent guy. We're losing AJ Green. We need another number one, and so I feel like that filled a need at the position, and it was a skill position that's always going to generate a little bit of buzz, like we did last year with Joe Burrow, and obviously getting Higgins in the second. Like we're loading up on that offense, and that draws people draws attention. It draws eyeballs to the team. Maybe sells some more season tickets and things like that. So there's a lot of other things at play than just drafting the best player or the best offensive lineman just because he's an offensive lineman. That doesn't mean he's the best pick. So there's still plenty of value later. So I'm looking forward to this year for sure.
Yeah, and the whole Chase idea wasn't necessarily, like, I didn't come up with the idea myself, obviously. Like, he was a lot of mocks, but I know Scott Connor, another Bengals fan, great podcast, Dynasty and Chill, like he really got on that idea that, like, he thought that's what the Bengals should do, and like double tap offensive line later, thinking the talent gap, like you said, wasn't as big. So felt like I was almost listening to Dynasty and Chill again.
Well, so it's actually funny because like Scott and me and Taylor, who's another guy, Taylor Connell, who's another Bengals fan, has his own podcast for the Bengals, even outside of fantasy. The three of us were on a DLF podcast previewing the Bengals, and all three of us were just kind of saying the same things. Like there wasn't a whole lot of disagreement. Like we're just all pulling the same boat, where it's like, yeah, no, we all agree. This is great. Like we're all big fans. So again, those are two of the smartest guys when it comes to Bengals and fantasy. So if I'm on their team, I'm doing something right. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, in fantasy, and that, that football draws us, but like, again, going for two, fantasy football is the focus of the site, DFS, all the various formats. So when did you make the leap to fantasy, and how did it all start for you?
Yeah, so I remember somewhat clearly when it was 2003. I remember that. It was right after I changed majors at UC, and I remember living in my own apartment, and some friends of mine from the dorm were like putting together a league. And I obviously have been watching football for a while. I've always been a fan. I've heard about fantasy, but I didn't think it was for me, right? I was like, no, there's too many numbers. There's too many things to keep track of. Like I just like watching the game. Well, I joined this league because a friend of mine joined it, and he was like, we need somebody else to join, and there's some others from our dorm. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll give it a try. And I think it was after week 1 or week 2, somewhere immediately after the season started, I was hooked. I'm like, oh yeah, I can get into this. Like, this is exactly what I like anyway. It's keeping track of all the stats. I thought I had a whole different mindset of what it was. I thought it was like there were different things that you got points for, and it was this crazy scoring. And like, no, it was just a straight, non-PPR, points per yardage only, and touchdowns. And it was real simple and easy to do. I got my butt kicked. I drafted so badly. I don't even remember my first draft pick or anything like that. People always ask, and I'm like, man, I remember some of the few first ones, but that league where I know it was my first league, I don't remember any of it because I just didn't care, right? I was just like, I don't know. I might have even auto-drafted after like 2 picks, because I just didn't know what I was doing. And I was like, let the computer pick. I don't really care. I'm just here for the fun. But I really started getting into it with a group of friends of mine in what I call my home keeper league now. And that was, I think, in 07, 06, somewhere in there. So I think this is my 16th year in the league. I think it's been going for 20. But that was the one where I had to work the night of the draft, and we all worked at the same restaurant. So I sent the commissioner, I sent him a list of what picks I wanted in what round, to be like, take the best available based on this list. And I want to do receiver in the first round and running back in the third. Like I tried to give it like as best I could, kind of lay it out. That was a horrible idea. Like that did not work at all. I got like a quarterback in the 4th round and a tight end in the 5th. Like I didn't see the board at all. I just was picking straight blind. Horrible team. And so I learned my lesson, never miss a draft. And I haven't missed one after that. Ever since then, I've never missed a single draft. So that was when I started kind of getting into it and actually playing the game. And I think, never look back. Let's put it that way.
I mean, if everyone worked at the restaurant, that should have been the easy solution. Have the draft at the restaurant, and then. But
yeah, for some reason that never happened. We always talked about that, but we did it once or twice, I want to say, like on an off day or like before the restaurant opened, things like that. But we always had the draft on a Friday because it was easier for us to get Fridays off than Saturday and Sunday and things like that. But I could not get that first Friday off. Like I was the only one that had to work for some reason. And so then after that, the drafts are always on Friday, and I requested it off like a year in advance. As soon as that draft was bad, I'm like, I'm taking that Friday off whenever it is. And so I like kind of got it in the book early, But yeah, I mean, restaurant life is always kind of like that, where it's just a bunch of us. And then, of course, all year, we almost all of us had to work on Sundays. And so we're just watching the games or watching on our phones or like sneaking in the back to catch scores and then trash talking the whole day while we're, serving people ribs. It was great. So it was a lot of fun.
You really need the appetite for it to be in that kind of environment.
Yeah, but it was another way for us to hang out and talk and kind of, talk something other than Bengals. And obviously we always talked about Bengals too, but it was good just to keep us all together. And it's been going on for a long time, which I'm really happy about.
Because really, I mean, yeah, the keeping track of the stats, the setting lineups, making roster decisions, like that control is fun, but the community sense, like we don't want to
Yeah.
just play against the computer all the time. We want leagues with other players and this the talking back and forth, and really the fantasy football community has really grown. You're pulling back a little bit, showing the shirt logo, and that's kind of what I was leading to. The Scott Fishbowl, right? Like that's over 1,900 people this year. Like it's one of the biggest, probably the biggest, bringer together of fantasy football minds, content creators and fans alike. Everything geared towards charity, and it's awesome. And I know of Viridian Global, which viridianglobal.com, or you can go through the goingfor2.com store, goingfor2.com/store, to get for that in particular, get the Going for Two gear from Viridian. But you can also check out Viridian Global for their Scott Fishbowl gear. I know Andrew will talk about some other musical band fans later, but AC/DC right there representing. I've got the women rock shirt with both rock and roll, right?
That's right. That's why this is the closest one I had to Incubus, which we'll get into later. But yeah, this is, I bought a few of the shirts, and a lot of them were just, some of them were like the Captain Gooch and the Shrimp Shack shooters, that kind of thing. Like, had to buy that one. I just thought that was hilarious. I bought a couple of them from the RotoWare kind of store, and I think I bought a couple from FF Pod shirts from Russ, Dynasty Outhouse, and things like that. I bought a couple from those guys too, so I think this is one of theirs. And so maybe not actually, but either way, like that. I went a little nuts this year. I bought like 5 or 6 shirts. I was like, I couldn't help it. There's just too many good ones.
I mean, you get a good shirt and you feel good because again, a lot of this money is going to charity. So really appreciate all those companies for doing that.
Yeah, it was great. And it brings awareness too. I've actually had a couple people comment on it in years past where they go, what does that mean? What is SFBX? Or what is it? And I get to tell them like, hey, it's a charity fantasy football tournament, 1,000 people in it or something. And they just kind of go, what? Like, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty crazy that we get to raise all this money for something good, So it's always good to be a part of something big like that.
Yeah, for sure. And again, Fantasy Pros, right? Like that's a pretty big name in fantasy. So how did you go from just playing fantasy football to creating content about the game we love about a game?
Yeah, the game of a game. And then there's the game within that game of a game of, how do we create content, right? So it's kind of a third level removed now in a way, which I kind of like. But no, it was, I think 2019, I just started, I had my first Dynasty League draft, and some buddies, a different friend group, but some other buddies of mine from Chicago decided to get together and do a Dynasty draft. It was an auction startup, which I had never done an auction before, never done Dynasty before. Ended up price enforcing on my guy, AJ Green, and got stuck with him for a lot of money, which was, I regretted it. But so I went 1-12 my first year. I did horrible. And so it's a Dynasty League, so it's not like I can start over. So at that point, at the end of that season, I was like, man, I got to turn this ship around. I got to do something. I got to do some studying. And no one else in my league was really that hardcore. There were like 1 or 2 guys that did a lot of redraft. Like I'd done redraft for a lot of years. But when that season ended, and I think it was around March or April, right after the draft, I was like, you know what? I'm going on Twitter and I'm just going to find people that know what they're doing. And I'm going to start following some smart people. And so I created the Andrew Hall FF Twitter account and started a whole new thing where I'm just like, I'm only following Twitter people. I got the big obvious names, all the check marks and all that. But then after, I don't know, 6 months or so, I started getting in touch with a whole bunch of more people. I got into SFB9 at the last minute because somebody timed out on the draft and I just got lucky. Got me into a whole bunch of new people and, kind of spreading the word and all that. So it was around that time that I started thinking, well, I've learned a lot. I kind of want to share what I've learned. And so I started putting out stuff on Twitter, and then actually got reached out to by Pro Football Network, PFN. They were just starting up their fantasy team for that year pretty much. They had just done NFL content almost exclusively. And so I kind of joined up with them and started writing a bunch of articles for them, and it just sort of kept going. And then so, off season last year kept writing, and then last year kept writing. And then after the end of this last season, my second with PFN, they kind of were taking a break and were seeing if they were going to start hiring people full time because it was just contract work. And everybody was contractors, and they were growing at a really good rate, and which is great, honestly. Like that's the way to do it. So they sent kind of all of us contractors home for a few months just to kind of get their ducks in a row. And when that happened, I reached out to Fantasy Pros just to be like, hey, I've got a bunch of content. I like writing. I like having people I can talk to and interact with. I kind of want to keep growing my brand and talk in the off season. And they were nice enough to let me stay and kind of stay in the content creating industry. And so I've been writing for them pretty much since April, I want to say, and I'll be going with them all season long. I'm going to stick with them and do PFN this year. So that'll be tricky along with the podcast. So be a whole bunch more content for me coming out, but I love it. I think that's the best way to do it is the reason I like doing it is because ultimately I started it because I wanted to find out something like, okay, well, let's go see about vacated targets. Now, I know that vacated targets are a misnomer. That's not really what you're looking at there. You're looking at targets for left, leaving. They're not vacated. They're taken away. As Peter Howard would say, they're not vacated. You take them with you, right? You've earned those targets. But it was an interesting experiment for me to kind of get my foot wet and sort of see what that was. And that sort of snowballed into like every article I write is just me looking at information and then coming up with what I come up with. Most of the articles I write, I don't really have an end game in it. I don't have a thesis until I finish. I'm like, all right, let's go write about Juju Smith-Schuster. Let's go see how he is. Or let's go write about, I don't know, Matt Stafford. Let's go see how he is. See what numbers tell us and see what the stats say and things like that. So a lot of that is really just me researching it out and then sharing that with everyone, because I feel like that's part of the fun of this, right? The community, the talking. And so having someone out there to read my stuff is always it's an honor to have people go, oh, I read your stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's great. That's why I wrote it. But like, what'd you think of it? Like, you want to talk about it? Like, that's the reason I wrote it. You know what I mean? Like, I love feedback. And there is always going to be positive and negative feedback, right? That's how this industry works. But sometimes that negative stuff can be really eye-opening too. It's like, well, I didn't think of that. Or, oh, that's an angle I hadn't thought of. And maybe there's something there. And so I'll go back and rewrite or reword it or, write a new article most of the time where I'm like, maybe I was wrong before, right? Here's new information I looked at. And maybe this split tells us something different. And so that's kind of the whole point of it. And that's why I love creating content and why I'm like, let's go do more of it. Let's go learn more. That's the whole point.
So sharing and I guess caring about each other's work.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I mean, I don't write just to write, I don't write just to talk to the ether. It's really just a long form tweet is really the way I look at it. Like, here's just a bunch of stuff I've come up with. And again, the reason I tweet it out is to get engagement and to get people to talk to me. It's not because I want followers. That number doesn't really matter. It's more like, I just want to talk about football. You know what I mean? Especially in June, July, and August, when it's like getting up into the season, I'm most ready to talk about football right now, right? Like, let's get more conversations. And so if I can write an article that generates thought and provokes argument and all of that, I'm all for it, right? I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to tell you what I do.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good way to think about that last phrase, right? I mean,
yeah.
Advise, but not control.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people use the word expert or analyst and things like this, and I don't know if I'm any of that. I started using the term, I'm a fantasy advisor, right? Like, you want my advice, then I'm an advisor, right? You can come to me and say, hey, would you do this trade? And I have people in my DMs all the time with this kind of thing where they're like, hey, what do you think about this? Or, who should I take at this pick? And I'm like, well, if it were me, I'd take this. That's not saying that's the right pick, and I'm not telling you what to do, but I just like XYZ over ABC, right? I just like this guy over that guy. Or I would go running back because I think you need a little help there, and running backs are hard to find as you get later, and that kind of stuff, where I'm just like, here's what I would do. I'm by no means am I saying I'm the answer or I'm God or anything like a lot of these other fantasy analysts out here that are like, I'm better than everybody and here's why. Mine's like, oh, here's what I do. Let's talk about it. And that's pretty much where I go with every article. Is like, well, this is my thought. I'm not saying I'm right, but here's one way that seems to work for me. That's pretty much it.
All right. So apparently people like the response. We've got Geek Mill here. Yes, Andrew, appreciate the mindfulness of your response. Learning a lot tonight. So Geek, appreciate you joining. I know he's in the Fantasy Coaches Charity Bowl alongside me. I think we're both in the cat division there.
Very
so
nice.
Cool cats, apparently. Well, I'm not so cool. But
you're getting there.
Thanks. Gerson, fantasy advisor. I love that. Thanks, G.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I've started using that a lot more where it's, I'm a writer. I'm not an analyst. Yes, I analyze things, but I feel like that's just such a lofty title. But yeah, fantasy advisor, I'm like, I can advise you. That's all I really want to do is just, you don't have to, that also takes some of the onus off, right? If I'm telling you what to do and it's wrong, then it's my fault. If I'm advising you what I would do and it's wrong, well, you took my advice, you made the decision. Because ultimately, that's where I think we get the most around the axle on things is it's your team. Right? Like, you want to put blame on someone when there's a bad time or you didn't do well. That's your fault. Your team didn't do well. Like, you had a bad time. You can't blame someone else for your decisions, right? You click the start button, you click the submit lineup, you click the draft, right? That's all you doing that. And I think a lot of times there are people out there, big or small, they get kind of wrapped up in this, well, I'm the expert, I should know better. Or like they take it so serious and it's like, I don't want people to get upset with me when I tell them to do something that doesn't come through. And it's like, man, listen, personal accountability a little bit here. Like, I'm just here to advise you. If it doesn't pay off, I'm probably losing as well. You know what I mean? Like, I'm taking my own advice, right? So like, I'm not doing anything I wouldn't tell anyone else to do. And so that's ultimately what it comes down to is like, I'm just here to help. If you want to help, reach out. My DMs are always open. I say it to people all the time. Send me a note. I'll be happy to chat with you and say, hey, here's what I would do. And it may not be super timely because I do get a fair amount of them, but it's like, for the most part, I respond to pretty much every message. Tag me in Twitter polls, all that. I love doing that stuff. So yeah, and another opinion is always welcome in my book too. So if you see me tweeting, come respond. Let's be respectful, but come respond. That's what I always say. I love your opinion.
So just as a response to everything you've just said, I mean, like, the next question was like, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone starting out? But you've already given quite a lot of advice, like just talking about, not putting the full responsibility on yourself as the advisor. Again, maybe your advice is to just change the name and change the title. You talked about like just the love of the sharing of the content, and not about the numbers. It's about the engagement and what that brings. So, is there any advice beyond that, or do we move on?
Well, I think that, I don't know. There's some other layers to that, and it's the easy stuff, like treat others how you want to be treated, right? Like if you're making content and you're putting yourself out there and kind of putting all of your thoughts out on paper or on the screen or in your tweets or whatever, and then you see someone else doing the same thing and you go trash them, why? You know what I mean? Like they're just doing the same thing you're doing, right? Like all of us are just putting out our advice, and there's no need for negativity, even though there's room for it, right? So my logic too is don't be negative. There's no reason for that. You can disagree with someone else's opinions. That's different. Like you can say something about the sky is blue, and I'm like, I think it's kind of more purple, right? Like I just don't see it as blue. I think it's a little bit darker than that to me, and I think that's a different way than no, you're wrong. Like that's not an engagement. That's not a conversation. Like you're just trying to be a jerk. And I think a lot of times, and this adage is true for everything, not just fantasy, but hurt people, right? So if someone is hurting you, it's probably because they're hurting. So I tend to take the upper hand a little bit and say, hey man, why are you so angry? Like, why is this opinion getting you so riled up? Is it because you've had a lot of these discussions and people have attacked you and you just don't feel like it's worth the discussion anymore? Like that's fine, but I wasn't that person, right? Like I'm just trying to talk my ideas out, tell you who I'm thinking and what I'm planning and all this. And I think too, a lot of it can be, public grandstanding versus private talks, right? And so some people just have this persona that they have to portray, and it's like, no, we don't need to do that. Let's just be ourselves, right? Like that's why my handle is my name and my face is in everything. Like this is who I am, man. I'm not hiding behind anything. I don't have like a crazy brand that I've come up with that is a fake thing and I'm hiding myself. I'm fine with that if you are, but my logic is you get me, right? This is who I am. And I think if we all did that and we all held each other to the same regard of, would you say that to their face? It'd probably be a better place. So that's kind of how I'm trying to take it. Just a little bit of positivity goes a long way.
A little bit more comments coming in too. PJ Kennedy saying, and I know PJ, he listens and tunes into quite a lot of the Going for Two shows, so really appreciate that, PJ. People need to listen to all advice and then make their own decisions and stop blaming others. So kind of what you were saying.
Yep. I hate when people come back and say, man, I can't believe you told me to draft that guy. And I'm like, I just told you what I would do. You had the ability to change your mind. I'm not going to get upset if you pick someone else. Like, go ahead.
And I think, if you're practicing what you preach, like if the advice you're giving is the advice you have, you don't feel guilty if something goes wrong because,
right.
I'm losing at it too. Potentially lost more money than you did on it, right? So
well, and there's no benefit in like saying, oh, go draft Cam Akers and then not drafting Cam Akers yourself, right? Like, what are you doing here? Like, that's also really hard to keep up with. Like, what are your public takes different than your private ones? Like, I can't do that. That's just too much effort.
You had to mention Cam Akers and make me sad. But yeah, I had him at Dynasty RB5 before the injury. And I mean, I think in my Dynasty leagues, I was up to like 25% rostership on him. So,
man.
Couple, one of those salary cap contract leagues. So it's like, okay, put him on IR, save the money, hope for the best. Managed to get a 2023 first. We talked about this in the Dynasty Gambit though. So the extensive discussion with a few people, like Gerson was on the last episode, and he says Andrew is a real G, and this is literally coming from G. Gerson,
I was gonna say, no, you the real G, Gerson. Yeah, I don't have a G in my name at all.
Hall, HG, they're close, right? So Fancy BBQ, Eric Johnson, lots of folks have lost the ability to have rational conversations despite disagreeing. So I think, some other great points.
That's not just fantasy, right? That's everything right now. We're all just so divided. It's tough. I get it.
Take it to the grain of salt is something I say in DFS a lot. Like, yeah. And I think, Gerson's definitely one of those where, he's putting a lot of money on those lineups that he's advising, and definitely advise people to check out that show on Friday nights in season, the Armchair DFS show.
Perfect. There you go.
Yeah, I'm trying to segue enough there. Hopefully you're happy, Jeff, with all the promotion.
That's good. Very natural. I liked it, Kyle. Very good.
I'm trying. Thanks, Andrew. So fantasy football, big hobbies, but do you have any hobbies outside of this, again, game based on a game on a game?
Yeah. So it's just kind of games all the way down. No, I think the only other real hobby I have is, watching TV and relaxing and all that. I don't know if that counts as a hobby, so I don't usually use that. But the other one that I like a lot is just yard work. I love going outside, putting on a podcast, mowing the lawn, trimming up the edges, kind of doing some just manual labor in a way, like kind of getting it all done. I love that.
Oh, that's awesome. Uh,
Sorry, no, and just seeing the job well done, kind of like in fantasy too. Like when you do all the effort and you draft, there's nothing better than seeing that team. There's nothing better than seeing that freshly cut yard. You know what I mean?
no, for sure, definitely. Just I guess quick on the TV shows. Is there? Do you have a favorite TV show ever? I know we're going to get to the high fives and favorites ever, but just put you on the spot.
So it kind of depends on my mood. There are a bunch of TV shows that I just keep going back to, or that I can be away from for years and see an episode on rerun and I'm just like, oh man. I think the one I want to say, like, the one that I keep in my brain as my favorite is Arrested Development. Like the first season of that show was just mind blowing. Like just the way that it wrapped around itself, and there were references they would call back to, and I think the writing was really good, and it just didn't get the love it needed. And then second season was still good, but it just kind of got a little too popular, right? But like that first season of Arrested Development is just like right there.
All right, awesome. Arrested Development. Any shows you're watching recently? Any new shows that you've gotten into?
So yeah, there were a couple that I just finished. Invincible, that season on Amazon Prime, which is from a comic book. I liked that one a lot. That was very different. It kind of reminded me of of The Boys, or like some of those like superhero, anti-hero kind of shows. Umbrella Academy was really good. Things like that. I always kind of like that kind of twist on a classic. So those are all kind of up there. I know my wife and I are actually watching Numbers right now, which is a procedural crime drama from CBS, I think like 10, 15 years ago. But it's just, one of those you can kind of sit down and not have to really focus on it too much. It just sort of like good end of the day. I don't have to listen to it. I just kind of have to, we'll be good. So yeah, we do that. We love watching reruns of The Office. Can't go wrong with that. I've seen that series probably 6 times all the way through now, and I don't see that ending. Right? Like, let's just keep going. Let's just keep starting over. So yeah, there's a bunch of those, but a lot of that is the mindless stuff that I can just sort of binge out on and just let go. I love that.
Well, I mean, you're looking at so many numbers all day that watching numbers is not as stressful.
Well, and at the same time, it is, because as with any TV show about math, they dumb it so far down that I find myself almost, I wouldn't say once an episode, probably every 3 episodes, I'm like, that's not what that means, or like, that's not how that works, or like, I mean, you're taking some liberties there, but it's a TV show, so okay, I'll allow it. But yeah, it's odd to watch them try to do math for the popular people,
What a way to say that. I'll allow it, like you have control over the show.
Well, it's like, all right, I'll keep watching. Right?
That's true. That is, that is your control to choose to stop watching.
Right.
So, I mean, you said it, right? Your face is on all your profile pics, even with the Incubus album. You made it almost a science to put your face everywhere.
Nice.
Thanks. But what's something that the fantasy community doesn't know about you?
I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty much an open book, but I mean, I've got a wife and a dog, and just bought a new house and moved in April during kind of the end of the pandemic, during a crazy time to move. So that was interesting. I got season tickets to the Bengals right before the pandemic last year, so I kind of take blame for some of that. I'm like, that's my bad. So I was really hoping to see Joey B, and that didn't happen. So I get to see him this year, hopefully. But yeah, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But I mean, for the most part, like I said, I'm kind of an open book. There's really not a lot that I keep close to the vest, because I don't know. It's just, I always tell my wife this too. Like, lying takes so much effort. I just don't have the time for it. Like, I'd really much rather just be honest with people. Like, if you ask me a question, I'll tell you what I think, and then we just move on. You can disagree with it. I'm not here to make friends as like I'm the most popular person ever, but I don't mind giving my opinion and listening to yours. And like we were talking about just before, like, disagreeing is fine. You know what I mean? Like, I have no problem disagreeing with people. Rarely do I get up in arms where I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like, we don't need to get angry. We can disagree. There's a difference.
I wonder where this is going to go. Perfect transition on your part here, but because Eric Johnson back again, maybe cooking something up with the fantasy barbecue there. But Andrew, what's your take on Brooklyn Nine-Nine in relation to some of the more acclaimed shows? And he corrects it later, saying acclaimed comedies in particular.
Well, I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I love Parks and Rec. I love The Good Place, like all of those, like Mike Schur and all that kind of stuff, like all of those good comedies that are just well written. They're in that same vein as Arrested Development and The Office to me. So yeah, I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Nine-Nine! Like, that's a good stuff. I know my wife and I watched that, pretty much binged that on Hulu about a year or two ago. Watched through the whole thing, and I had seen a lot of the episodes here and there, but never really in a row. It wasn't like appointment viewing, and I just kept missing them. So it was nice to see them all in a row. I loved Last Man on Earth. That's another great comedy that I thought was underrated. That kind of, I thought it did a really good job of reinventing itself every year, and has a terrific apocalyptic kind of feel to it. So we started that one during the pandemic last year and breezed right through that whole thing. And I'm sure I'll go back to that one because that was great. So there's really, it's hard to find a show I don't like, is what I've realized, that most of the time when I watch a show, it's because I like it. There are a couple that I don't remember because I didn't watch a lot of them, but there are a couple of shows that I start and I'm like, meh. Like recently I just put out on Twitter, like I'm finally into season 3 of The Wire, right? So like I work from home. So a lot of times I'll put TV on in the background and things like that. And so I just finished season 2 last week of The Wire, and I was like, all right, this is a pretty good show. Everybody's talking about it, right? And I thought it was really good. And I was like, let's see what people think. And I got a lot of responses to that. I'm like, what? That gets more responses than any of my fantasy advice. Like, what is this? I just told people, I'm not even giving advice. I'm just like, I just finished season 2, and everyone's like, I have an opinion. Like, I love that about TV, though, right? Especially like good TV. People always have opinions on that. But back to the topic, NineNine for sure. That's in there. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I wouldn't necessarily put it in the top tier of comedies, but I'm very reserved.
I think it's that second tier. Yeah, the top tier is very, very few. There's maybe 4 or 5 in that top tier, and even that it can get blurry depending on the day. But I do think that second tier is deep for me. That second tier is above average. If we're just going like 5 tiers, right? If we just go the standard and like there's mediocre and then there's that better than average, that's a lot of shows that I would go back to for sure.
Yeah, for sure. If it's such a deep tier, I probably would put Brooklyn maybe towards the upper echelon of the tiers, just because classic characters, really really well designed characters, a lot of, like everyone, right? Like not just the main character, right? It's not just a Peralta show. It really does.
Well, the whole ensemble stayed the ensemble for so long. Like those characters got so much time to flesh themselves out. It was great. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, like shows like that and really almost any of those comedies I'm talking about are kind of like the wide receivers in fantasy. There's just so many of them. Like, oh man, I don't know which one I want, but it doesn't matter. They'll be there when I'm ready. So that's the analogy I would make to get back to fantasy, I guess. But it's like, man, there's so many good comedies, just like there's so many good wide receivers. Oh man.
Yeah. Pick, very slim at the top, right? Who you like, there's not a lot I'd be willing to take in the first 2 rounds, really, of most drafts, whether it's single quarterback or super flex.
That's right.
Be very selective, but, definitely want to take a lot of them rounds 3 through 8, 3 through 9, wherever that is. So, maybe I'm a little old school, Packers fan. I still like Adams, the old guy. I still like Monty Python's Flying Circus, so all the way back to the 60s, 70s. It's funny because you almost called back to it earlier when you were talking about the argument thing, right? And then it made me think of the argument skit, right? And he's like, we're not arguing. It's just, you're just opposition. All you can say is no. No, it's not. And then he got him to say, no, it's not eventually. And then he realized, right? So sometimes
I feel you went down the hall. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah. But that's such a great one. Yeah. So
great show.
Call back to Monty Python's Flying Circus for anyone who doesn't know about, the Godfather's creators of like satire as we know it,
and sketch comedy. Really, I mean that Flying Circus show is. There were a lot of other sketch comedy shows, but I think they took it to a new direction and kind of made it fresh to kind of, I don't know, put it to a new angle, a new audience maybe. But yeah, that some of that Monty Python Flying Circus, all that stuff, avant-garde in a way. It's a terrific show for sure.
Now, every show kind of has that, like real life situations, but strange. There's something weird, strange about it, right? And they kind of had everything's normal except one thing about is just off.
Well, like the new show that just came out again, season 2 on Netflix was I Think You Should Leave. I don't know if you've seen that one yet, but that's one I'm watching recently. And it's kind of like all my favorite comedies like had a kid, right? It's got like all the guys from it's got Tim and Eric. It's got Tim from Tim and Eric who's in it a lot, and Tim Robinson is a different Tim who kind of is the main guy. But it's exactly like you said. It takes a little twist on a normal premise and then just kind of runs it into the ground, and it's terrific. So I highly recommend that for anybody out there, for sure. Definitely got to check out I Think You Should Leave. Amazing.
Is one of the early episodes a skit about a guy opening the door after a job interview and just opening it the wrong way? Like, is that?
I think so. Yeah. Okay. I haven't seen season 1 in a minute, but I know that I'm literally was just watching season 2, and there's like a whole skit where they go into like Santa Claus is an actor in a movie. And the first, like they go through the whole preview. It's a really bloody shoot 'em up action movie where Santa Claus plays the main character. And it's just such an interesting premise. And then that's all the setup. And then the actual joke comes when they're interviewing him for like after the movie for like press tour. Like, so what is it like having to deal with Christmas as an actor? And he gets up and he goes, no, we're not talking about that. Would you ask Johnny Depp about Christmas? Like, no, I'm an actor. You got to talk to me. It's such a, like, that's it. They're just driving that home. Like he's Santa Claus, but he's not allowed to talk about Christmas. It's just brilliant. Like, I just love that kind of stuff.
All right. So maybe, you know what? I think maybe I have seen it. Just the kind of, yeah. So at least, a few episodes here or there. At
I'm
least that's
sure
what
it's
I
been around on
remember.
Twitter too. It's terrific.
Apparently Eric likes it, so we'll keep talking because he's saying this is the RB1 of Fans football interview shows. Unfortunately, RB1 means like not a long lifespan, so we
Short
probably
term,
should.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so maybe we'll keep the TV talk to a minimum now and get back.
Criticism taken, Eric. Thanks. Ouch. I'm just kidding.
No, like Christian McCaffrey, you can always catch passes with it. So
Versatile. Yeah, I like it.
yeah, there we go. So yeah, we're going through a lot of different places, and I guess that's the main of this question here. You can take it really anywhere you want. If you could interview one person all time, who would it be?
Well, so I saw this question on the sheet and I had a couple of answers, and I feel like it kind of, again, it depends on the day. It depends on how I'm feeling. But the one that I just feel like would probably have me geeking out the most, which is, I think, ultimately what this question is meant to be. Like, if I could pick any one person, it had to be my kid idol, Joe Montana. Like, if I could somehow find myself in a room with Joe Montana and get to ask him some questions, they'd be dumb questions. Like, I would not come in prepared and like asking stats about his NFL career. I'd be like, what was it like getting, playing for the Chiefs? Like, how was that? Like, that had to hurt. What did you think about Steve Young coming up behind you? Like, those are the kind of things in my brain that I'd want to ask about. So, and he would probably never answer that, let alone us be in a room together. But that would be probably my like number one person to get an interview with. That would be so amazing for me.
He'd be your Santa Claus moment. Don't ask me about Christmas. Don't ask me about
Right.
Steve Young. Never
You
ask
can't ask me about
Steve.
the Chiefs. Like, what are you doing? Like, yeah. Okay, sir. All right. What about Joe Walsh? How'd you like Joe? Like, I could find a way to pivot, like they do in the episode. But yeah, it's good.
I really liked him especially when he went to the Eagles. I thought Joe Walsh was such a great guitarist.
Very nice. I was like, where is he going? Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, you got it right. You got that.
Got it.
We'll say revelation, but that is the next
That's what
question.
you're putting down. Yeah.
He's a great guitarist. Oh yeah, absolutely. We can talk about Joe Walsh if you want. But what's one revelation that you have that you wish maybe you had earlier in your life?
So, I mean, again, this is a little bit of a loaded question, right? There's so many ways to answer it, but I would just genuinely say that time is the most important asset you have. Time is the biggest thing that you will miss when it's gone, right? Like there's literally a finite amount of time that we're on this planet. There is an infinite amount of money you can earn, an infinite amount of relationships you can make. Literally, you can make as many as you want. You can get as big as you want. You can go as small as you want. And I say infinite, obviously it's not truly infinite in the sense of, we're talking stats and numbers, but it feels like it is. But time is always going. Time is you never get more time, right? There's not much you can do to earn time back. There's nothing you can trade for time. It's the most valuable asset we have. And so I always like to say that it's like, if I only have so much time, I might as well enjoy every minute of it. It's a lot of why I'm an optimist. And I wish I had been, I've always been an optimist, but I wish I had been more respectful of my own time when I was younger. When I was in high school and college, I was just looking to the future so much, like we all are, just trying to get out of high school, just trying to get out of college, and not really enjoying where I was. Is always like looking forward to the next step and enjoying that in the future. And then it was odd because when I got there, I was just looking to the next step, right? Where it's like I never really sat and stood where I was and go, I'm happy here. That happened probably about 10 years ago or so, where I was just like, you know what? I'm sick of worrying about what's going to happen next. I'm just going to take life as it comes. If I get something great, if I don't, great. I only have one life and I got to live it. And a lot of that is just, not really getting so bogged down in the negative. I think that's a lot of it. A lot of it can be just summed up that way. Don't spend time on negative things, right? Like if time is a finite asset, I'm not going to spend it on negative arguments. I don't mind arguing with people, like iron sharpens iron and all that. I don't mind debating and discussing. But to me, there is a level of arguing that becomes pointless, right? Where it's like, well, now we're getting into personal attacks and we're getting those, little jabs in here. And it's like, well, that's not necessary. Like, we don't need to do that. So I'm just going to bow out. You have a great day. Have a terrific life. I'm not here to upset you. I'm just trying to ask questions and get better myself. You're not into that. I see. That's fine. We'll part ways, And so I wish I'd learned to do that earlier in life, because I don't know. I feel like I wasted a ton of my life in my 20s just arguing with people and like being upset and trying to prove them right or prove myself right, I guess, and prove them wrong. And I just wish I could go back and be like, no, man, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Be more respectful and more cherished with your time.
Well, now we're going to get into, I guess, more heavy fantasy stuff and a debate that could lead to some discussing arguing.
All right. I'm ready for this one. I'm ready. This is the one I was waiting for.
All right. So give us your thoughts, Andrew Hall, on zero RB.
So here's where I go with this, and I don't have this written out. I'm just kind of off the top of my head. To me, zero RB is not a strategy. It's a reaction. It's more of a tactic once you're in battle, right? Once something happens to you, you can then go, all right, well, I've reacted in this manner. I've decided to play this as a retaliation strike. I don't think anybody in their right mind, and I don't mean to be overgenerally kind of overly ridiculous with this. I don't think a lot of people go into drafts saying, I am not drafting a running back until the 8th round. I don't think that's how most people end up with zero RB teams. Sure, there are some, but for the most part, you get a team where the value is just there. If you're at the 1 pick, you're not going to take a receiver, right? Like in a super flex, you're not going to take a receiver at 101. You're going to take Pat Mahomes. You're going to take Christian McCaffrey, right? There are certain spots in the draft that kind of warrant this zero RB makes sense. I do understand the strategy and I understand the value of it. If it's really just a different result of best player available, right? Let the draft come to you, stay water. Those are kind of strategies that I think this employs. But it's a tactic to say, kind of looking back, if I were to kind of, well, let's look back and see how I did. Oh, it looks like I didn't take a running back for a few rounds. Like the term zero running back bothers me a little bit because it's semantics and that's just how my brain works. But it really is just I lean receiver. It's a pro receiver, not anti running back stance, which I think sometimes gets convoluted because they are not opposites, right? I can be pro receiver and then not be anti running back. Right. Like I just favor the receiver. I just lean receiver every time it comes around. I'm just like, I'm at the 110 and I'm like, you know what? Devontae Adams is still here. I'm not really jazzed about these other running backs. I'll go Adams. And then Tyreek Hill, my wide receiver 2, is still there in the second. Like, well, might as well take Tyreek Hill over these other guys I'm still not jazzed about. So it ends up being like a reactionary thing at the end of a draft to look back and go, I went zero RB. Well, to me, that's not a strategy. So that's kind of where I get kind of, I don't know, up around my own axle about it, where it's like, is it a strategy? I guess, but it's really just a fancier or a specific way of playing best player available.
All right. So clearly prepared for that one.
Well, only because that's a discussion that I've had with Kevin Tompkins over and over. He and I are in a bunch of different group chats. We're good friends. I've been on his podcast. There's a couple others out there that I know are very, very, very zero RB truthers. And I'm not saying you can't do it. By no means. Go do it. Have your fun, right? It's something that I find myself not deploying because I end up liking running back at some point. Right, I'm looking at my starting roster and I'm like, oh, it's the 12th round and I don't have a running back. Well, let's just keep skipping it. Like, I can't do that. That's not how my brain is wired. So yeah, I mean, it's intentionally vague yet too specific somehow. I don't know. It's just confusing to me.
That sounds like it could be an Incubus lyric.
Yeah, actually, it does.
Yeah, I like how I put the echo at the end of the question. But yeah, so you're saying like zero RB is kind of no fun?
Well, it's not that it's no fun. I personally like my teams to have running backs on them. Maybe that's the easiest way to put it. Like, I'm not saying that you can't do it. Again, everybody is different. And I definitely see the idea and the value in zigging when others zag, right? If everyone's drafting running backs, then don't. I totally get that logic. If you're seeing a bunch of value show up at wide receiver and your league allows for you to only start one running back and maybe 5 flexes you can fill with your receivers, go for it, right? Like every league is different too, and I think that's something that gets overlooked is the context isn't really there on Twitter, right? When you put out a trade poll and you have 140 characters, you can't really convey the entire scope of what's going on. When you say, hey, which would you rather have, Devontae Adams or Aaron Rodgers, and it's a super flex, and you get everybody saying, oh, it's this side easier, smash this side, oh my God, not even close. It's like, okay, but wait, what if I told you that the guy trading me Aaron Rodgers has told me specifically he'll never trade Aaron Rodgers, and he's finally decided to loosen his grip, but his price is a lot more than I'm willing to pay. And I know this is a free league with buddies of mine, and if I get Aaron Rodgers, it makes me so happy. Like, I'll do it. I'll overpay. That context isn't in the tweet, man. Like, that needs to be in there, right? And so that's why I always prefer people chat me rather than tag me in tweet polls, although I don't mind either. But if you're looking for honest advice of like which side of this trade would you take? And it's like 4 players on each side. And I'm like, I don't know, this side, whatever. This is the one it just looks like better to me. And if you want more, like, feel free to DM me, right? Like, I have no problem explaining and elaborating on my position. In most situations, I'll explain why. I'll be like, I don't know, I like this over this. I like this over this. This is kind of a push. And it makes me feel like that side makes more sense. And they may say something that's like, well, it's half PPR and we have to start 3 running backs. I'll be like, well, see, that changes everything. Give me the other side. Right? Like, oh, you only start 9? Well, then we should consolidate, get the best player in the trade. Oh, you start 13? Oh, I definitely see where you're giving away Barkley for these other little pieces because you need depth, right? Like, all that stuff matters. And I think we've become so, I don't know, immediate gratification demanding on Twitter where it's like, I just want to know if I won the trade or not. I don't need all this. Just, did I win? And sure. Yeah, man, you won the trade. Good job. Like, that's what Twitter's for. It's just like, yeah, you did great.
Yeah. And it's funny because back to Scott Connor again. I mean, I've heard him talk, and whenever he gets asked a question, he basically has like 5 questions that he has to ask first before he can give his answer, right? I think it's a lot of that. It's
I
scoring
love his
settings and roster
podcast.
settings.
When you did the full press, I think with him, oh man, that was a great Dynasty Talk podcast, because Scott literally can just go for hours, and his methodology is so different than mine, and I love it because I want to be that good. Like I want to be right there. I don't have 50 teams to diversify, and I think he hit on that too on that episode too, where it's like if you're only in one league, the answer is going to be different than if you're in 50. Which again, I don't think that gets brought up at all. If you're in one home league where the guy never trades, like I said before, then you might have to overpay to get Aaron Rodgers. And if you think they're both going to do well, maybe it makes more sense for your team to have Aaron Rodgers, right? Like, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of context here. But if you're in 50 leagues and you've got 18 shares of Devontae Adams, then that trade makes even more sense. Get rid of him. You diversify your portfolio. And so I love the way he talked about that, because there are different types of fun to be had in this sport. There is no one way to do this, right? And I think everybody wants that one-way answer. When they go to Twitter and they post a poll, everybody should just know which side's better. I'm always like, it's not that easy, man. We need a little help. Let's get some more context.
Everyone's looking for that summer romance, that anti-gravity love song, and it's not always easy to do that.
It's not always available by aqueous transmission. You know what I mean? It's just not. You can't always catch it.
Stellar reference, dude.
I drive the point home.
We'll get off the Incubus for a sec, but okay, so just talking about so many different leagues, do you have a preferred league format?
I really do like Superflex. I think that value in quarterback is lost in 1QB. I do still play in 1QB leagues. I don't hate them, and I don't mind when people have them. I just prefer Superflex because I think it adds so much value to the quarterback position in trades and starting rosters and drafting and all that. I do like PPR more than half PPR or non-PPR at this point. I do think that adds a little bit more flavor and makes the points a little higher, which adds a little more variance. So I like that. I don't mind tight end premium. I'm not a huge proponent. I don't know if it needs to happen, but I don't like 2 tight end. I think that that's too far. Like when you have to start 2 of the same, tight end position, that's brutal, because then you end up starting players like, I don't know what it would be, like Foster Moreau or something, because it's just like the injuries and the buys. Like, maybe he gets a touchdown. And that's just too much luck, I think, you're putting in the league. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think we need that. Those are fun leagues too, and for different reasons, right? So again, I don't think there's any that I hate, but I think it would probably be a Superflex, PPR, probably 1.75. I wouldn't quite go 2 tight end premium, but 1.75 tight end premium. Probably a deeper starting, like probably start 12 or 13, to be honest. I love those leagues where your depth kind of comes into play. Yes, that adds a little bit of luck, but I think it still takes a lot of skill to have a deep roster. So yeah, some of that stuff is probably my favorite format-esque, if that's what you're asking.
And you mentioned luck with the deeper, with 13, but isn't it also considered lucky to only have 7? Then whoever got lucky and has the 1 or 2 elite assets, like whoever got the McCaffrey, or right. So it's interesting. I'm assuming you would prefer Dynasty over redraft, over best ball, over any other format, or?
So, I mean, I'm in some Dynasty best ball and some redraft best ball. So that's always kind of interesting to see. I love Dynasty best ball. That's my favorite combo, because there's no weekly lineups, but you get the Dynasty aspect. So that's my favorite. I'm only in 1 or 2 leagues, I think, that are Dynasty best ball at this point. And they're John Bosch or, Dan Myler crazy leagues, which I just love those. But yeah, I mean, I think Dynasty is probably where I'm at right now, just because there's so much more, nuance to it. Like in redraft, you make a trade. Like last year I made a trade. It was Mark Ingram and Rex Burkhead for Joe Mixon, but it was the week before Joe Mixon went out with an injury, and it was like he was doing really well, but he hadn't really performed that well. It was like, he had some up and down weeks, and Mark Ingram was still the starter and Rex Burkhead was getting a lot of touches. So the guy with the Mixon was like, yeah, sure, I'll make that trade. And everyone in the league was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, it's such an easy, like I stole Mixon. Well, then he got hurt. And I'm like, well, who looks better now, right? Like, you never know. And in redraft, it's like, well, now it doesn't matter because we start over, right? So I think in Dynasty, there's a lot more repercussions to trades. You have other assets like future picks to trade, which makes it more fun. Where, I've got one league where I've got, I think it's 14 or 15 draft picks next year. It's like, so I can use those are kind of like in a bank, right? It's like cash that I've got in my bank account that I can spend as I see fit down the season. If somebody gets hurt, I can trade for them. And like, hey, it's a future pick. Who cares? So I like that aspect of it. That just redraft doesn't have any of that. Even keeper leagues don't really have any of that. So I love that part of it. More trades, more assets. I'm a fan of all that.
It's funny how you've evolved, right? Because when you said you start like fantasy at first, it was the simplicity of it. Now you're playing in John Bosch leagues. Nothing simple there.
I've made some decisions. Let's put it that way. It's like, oh man, also the thing I like about it and some of this too is, I'm in so many different leagues at this point. I try to make sure that each one of them is different. Like I don't want to play in the same format in multiple ways. So it's like, why am I joining this league? What is the reason for this? And there's almost always some reason of it's with a certain group of people, or it's with a certain kind of scoring, or it's best ball. So I have to start a weekly lineup. Like there's always these, catches to it. And then ultimately this time of year, we get a lot of charity redraft. And I really have to stop myself from joining every single one of those because I kind of did that last year. I think I joined 3 or 4. And this year, I think I've only done 3, which I'm pretty happy about because like, whoa, okay, because I have a lot of Dynasty I'm maintaining too. And I have content I'm putting out. And like, I have to kind of, like I said before, with time, I have to be mindful of my time. And like, I can't give everybody my time. And I hate saying no. I'm definitely a people pleaser. But at the same time, saying no is like, no, I'm respecting my time here. So it ultimately all comes down to that. But on the other end of the spectrum, Dynasty takes up so much more time, all the off-season stuff, but I love that stuff. I love spending that time looking into a trade in March that makes no sense for redraft. Why would you talk trades? No, in Dynasty, I get to. I love it. Oh, leading up to the draft, we got our draft picks coming up in May. I'll trade you my first for so-and-so, right? Like those talks can happen. So I love that. Interactions.
Deadline spur action.
That's right.
Not that we're rushed for time, but we'll move into the all-time fantasy QB1, RB1, wide receiver 1, and tight end 1. If you've been paying attention, I kind of feel like I know the answer to 2 of these, but we'll see.
Well, so fantasy is different than NFL. I think we can all agree with that. I think fantasy QB1 has got to be Mike Vick. There was just something about that guy. The way he ran, you never knew. He could score a touchdown at any play. I remember he was a very hot topic in our home keeper league, I played in for all those years, where somebody took him in the first round and everybody's like, what are you doing? And it was like, it's so early. The guy won the league. Like, oh yeah, because he had Mike Vick. You know what I mean? Like he got all the points. So I think he'd have to be my fantasy QB1. I'm not sure I'd put him as my favorite person with all the stuff that went on, but fantasy points wise, he was really good. RB1, I probably would go with Brian Westbrook just because he won me a title when I really needed it, and it just was a great year, and he just dominated for so many years. Him and Steven Jackson are 2 of those guys that I just always look back on like, man, they were good. Like they were just guys you could set and forget. So I love that. Wide receiver 1, I think I go with Tyreek Hill. I just, again, thinking of it like as a fantasy player and for the amount of years he's done it and will probably do it with Mahomes, I don't see that changing anytime soon. I just think all time, he's got to be up there. There are definitely others that I would put in consideration, but for me, Tyreek is just a beast. And again, I don't know when it's going to end, but I think he's already done enough to warrant that, which says a lot. And then tight end 1, I mean, I guess it's Kelsey, but it's just because there's no one else that's done it like that. And I hate to have 2 Chiefs in a row like that, but like that's just where my brain goes. Where it's like I don't think anyone's been like Kelsey. There were a couple guys back in the day, honorable mentions like LaDainian Tomlinson or Sean Alexander, and Darren Waller is creeping up there for me. I really like him. I think he's a good value and could have that longevity if he sticks around and some of that. So yeah, there's a couple of other names, but those are the ones that just sort of felt like the obvious answers for me right now.
Don't tell Joe Montana that not only did you not pick him, but you picked 2 Chiefs.
So ironically, he wasn't the greatest fantasy quarterback that I remember, but I wasn't playing fantasy at the time. So maybe I was wrong, right? Fantasy back then might have been very different. I remember following the games and watching him play in the Super Bowl, but we don't play fantasy that week. So like, again, all of my memories of him are like, postseason, which he was a beast in the NFL. I don't know if I'd pick anyone else NFL wise, even over Brady. I like Montana, which got me into a whole bunch of hot topics at work when they just definitely disagreed with that. But the point I'm getting at is I love Joe Montana, but for fantasy, it's got to be Mike Vick, man. He was just a beast on the field.
All right, and just quickly with Hill, I know right now I have him as my dynasty wide receiver 1 at this moment. Are you in agreement with that? I know it seems like Justin Jefferson right now might be the popular answer for that, but how do you lean on that quickly?
So I mean, I kind of waffle all over the place with the receiver. Like we were kind of talking about it before. There's so many good receivers. I mean, in Dynasty, it's hard not to put Tyreek at number 1. I think before the Aaron Rodgers question marks, I had Devontae Adams there just because there was no one else, not even Travis Kelce. I mean, Tanyan is not Kelce, and they had no other receivers. Aaron Rodgers obviously favors Adams because, again, there's no one else there. But at the same time, that worked for fantasy. Like Adams is the guy, and he just blows records out of the water. With this latest Aaron Rodgers kind of confusion or uncertainty, maybe is a better way to put it, I probably knock him down just a little bit to number 2. You know what I mean? Like, all right, that's not a long way. But I do think Tyreek, I definitely get the logic for him being number 1. I think that there is some potential for him to even get better. I think I looked at something, I don't know if think Ryan McDowell posted this, like the Dynasty DLF Dynasty ADP from last July, and the only one on there that didn't change in the top 10, if I recall, was Tyreek Hill was 2 last year and is 2 this year. And I'm like, that's impressive, because last year number 1 was Michael Thomas, and we're all kind of seeing what happened there. And Michael Thomas might have been my number 1 last year and not Tyreek Hill. And so this year, Hill's still number 2. Well, that to me, that change, that lack of change, I guess, that says more than anything. Like, he's about as reliable as you can get. And at the first pick, at the first receiver, I mean, that's what you're looking for. Give me consistency. So, yeah, I totally get it.
And I mean, not to say he's the most consistent receiver, because I think, like, you know, what Devontae Adams, what was it, I guess Devontae Adams 2018 was that, like, had this amazing floor, but I don't think he had a 30-point game all season, or he might have just cracked 30 barely, right? So, like, a super high floor, but, you know, the weekly ceiling wasn't necessarily wide receiver 1 on any given week, but Tyreek seems to, like, really have that, where he could easily be the wide receiver 1 any given week. And I think from the wide receiver perspective, I think that's more important to gear towards. I'll go for the safe floor with the running backs. But right off the bat, I think I don't necessarily want to chase floor for wide receivers. I think even early, and I tend to be like a safe floor early, get the risky guys later. But I think for wide receiver, I'm going to try and right off the bat go for ceiling. And I know last year I was super high on Galladay, thinking, okay, he's got the safe floor of targets, and we saw, you know, Galladay really didn't have a safe floor. I think I had him in as redraft wide receiver 5, and that was like, so I ended up with a few shares of him, because I mean, if I'm going to say that, it's because I'm drafting him. Like, I definitely remember a couple of, like, single quarterback drafts where I took Galladay in the second round. And I remember one of those particularly was, okay, Kamara, great start, and then pair him with Galladay, and it just kind of ruins the draft. So I think go for the ceiling is where right off the bat with receivers. So Hill makes sense.
I don't hate that logic at all. And actually, I just put out an article, I want to say last week, for a fantasy pro, maybe 2 weeks ago now, about drafting for balance, where I personally, again, I'm not saying everyone needs to do what I do. Don't take it the wrong way, but I like drafting my team with a bit of both, with a bit of floor and a bit of upside. And the reason I do that is I think you can't win a title without upside, but you can't get to the playoffs without floor. You know, you kind of need a little bit of both. Sometimes you just need to squeak out a win 75-73. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just go all ceiling players and then you have those 50-point weeks. I've seen it happen. It's brutal. And so a lot of times too, if I'm, like, you kind of hit on this, if I'm drafting a team, if I'm doing redraft and my first 3 picks are, I don't know, running back, tight end, running back, you know, pretty solid floor players. And in the 4th round, I'm looking at like a Robert Woods or a Amari Cooper or something like that. I'm like, you know what, give me Amari Cooper. I think he's got a bigger upside. I think he's got a higher ceiling. You might have a lower floor too, because CD could take that job over, and Dak may have, there's 3 receivers and Zeke. Like, it could be a really bad week, but I think at that point I need ceiling. I've got enough floor. And the same goes true the other way. If I draft Hill in the 1st round, I might look at, well, okay, I've got my ceiling for a little while. Let me get some floor. And I think too, with the way flex positions are going, I think a lot of times people say, well, your flex should be your upside plays. And I agree with that logic, but if I switch my flex with receiver, does it matter then? Like, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, they're all still players on my roster. And so, like, it's the same logic, but I like to have a little bit of floor too. You know, Tyler Boyd is another great floor option, right? Like, someone that's getting criminally underrated for my Bengals back here. You know, I think he's one of those guys I would love to draft as a 4th or 5th receiver, because you know you're going to get 10 to 12 points a week. Sometimes that's all you need to win, is just to get a consistent floor, get a consistent number in there. And then you have your guys like Tyreek getting 30 points to win you by a lot. Okay, great. But at least I got my 10 from Boyd. And then I know going into the end of the season, when you got to win a game to get in the playoffs, or win a game in the playoffs, sometimes that 1 week, I don't know how many times I've had a terrific team that would have won every week except the first week of the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like, I'm 13-0, I'm going in and I lose by 12 points because the guy just had all upside players. And then he loses the next week, scoring half the points he scored against me. Like, what is this? Because there's a lot of variety, a lot of variance in what we do. And so you got to try to just limit the amount of variance on your team. That's always how I see it. So that means, yes, there is a need for upside to win the championship and be different, but I still think there's a need for floor. And depending on the league, if you're in a league like Scott Fishbowl, where there's, 2,000 people playing or something crazy, or you're in a best ball league and you don't get to set lineups, so it doesn't really matter, ceiling all the way, man. Like, that makes total sense, because you don't have to pick your lineup. But when you're setting a roster, floor matters.
Well, and with Scott Fishbowl, right? Like, early on, I kind of made the decision to go all in on ceiling. I don't know if, like, because let me think. Yeah, you were ahead of me in the odd rounds, although with the reversal, you would have been still behind me. You'd been still ahead of me, I guess, in the 4th round. But I passed on AJ Brown in the 4th to take Keenan Allen, because I had the stack with Herbert, right? And I don't know. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Brown went the next pick or next two, right? That would have been something where almost any other draft, I don't think I would have done that. But just because it's like just because I need that, and like I know I'm not going to get Keenan Allen again. Like AJ Brown's great, but can I get that extra upside with Allen? So we'll see. I mean, I guess as a direct competitor, you're probably hoping I'm wrong. But
Well, no, and I think your roster is almost like we were just talking about this. Like in my roster, I think I got a lot of flash players at the top, and I went very floor heavy in the middle, and like in the middle of rounds of the middle of the first 11 rounds, I guess your starting lineup. Because like I got Lamar Jackson, Alvin Kamara, Tyreek Hill with my first 3 picks. Like the fact that I could get Tyreek Hill at 306 blew my mind, but I'm like, that's upside. Kamara upside, right? Like there is a chance that he gets hurt. Running backs always have that risk. So I'm like, Kamara's maybe the only guy on that offense. Lamar Jackson, very risky, runs around, lots of upside. And then my 4th pick was Andrews to pair with Jackson, because again, I do like to get at least one stack in these big tournaments just to kind of differentiate a little. And then I went with Derek Carr, about the flooriest floor player you can ever floor, right? Myles Gaskin, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Like I'm just floor. Like I just need to get a couple of weeks where I can still feel confident. So yeah, that was sort of my logic going into the draft, to sort of see how the first few rounds go. And when they went really risky for me, like really, I don't know, high variety kind of players, I'm like, all right, I got to go back to the well and get some solid production out of these base guys. And then of course that goes off the rails after that, because you never know what you're going to get. But I love that about this. And then again, something we didn't really get into, I don't like kickers in Dynasty, and kickers in defense have always just kind of bothered me in Dynasty. Like, why do we do that? There is not a lot of year to year, or kind of whatever you want to call it, like why hold on to those guys? I don't mind defenses and kind of a team defense attitude. I don't mind that, but in redraft. But kickers to me are one of the luckiest, flukiest positions ever. And I drafted 2 of them in Scott Fishbowl, where I'm like, you know what? They do provide a floor, and I might need that floor here some weeks. They don't get hurt as often. So I'm like, well, maybe that could benefit me at some point. I also think our league wasn't really drafting kickers very early. I mean, I got Koo in the 14th, which was kind of early for him, but I was like, I don't mind going at that point, and it didn't seem like anybody else was. So I'm like, well, all right, I'll go with some kickers here. And again, it's just a way to zig instead of zag. And in those last rounds, my God, like who knows what any of these players are going to be. So I'm just like really grasping at straws. That draft is so deep. I love it. You're doing 22 rounds in a start 11 league. Man, you start to scrape the barrel, and it comes quick. That 15th round, you're like, oh man, I don't like any of these guys. So I love that about Scott Fishbowl. It just makes everything so much more fun.
It's not who I like the most; it's who I dislike the least at this point.
There you go. That's right.
Yeah, I think because I got Will Lutz in the 21st round, so my second last pick, and I'm like, well, I'll get the guy that I think I'll just play when he's at home. I think that's some predictability here. It probably won't work that way. He's going to get this amazing game on the road.
You never know. But yeah, I like it.
In terms of, that's what we want to know now, all the things you like. So we'll get to the final segment of the show, the high fives. We're going to start off with top 5 books.
Okay, so I used to read a lot, and I don't read as much. I shouldn't say books. I don't read books as much. I read a lot of fantasy content actually lately, and I'm reading a lot on Twitter, and I'm reading a lot of articles and different things in the world, but I just don't read books as much as I used to. So most of my books are from when I was in that mode, which I would say was like 98 to like 2012, somewhere in there. But my number one, and I'll go top to bottom, and I'll just kind of read through them, and then we can discuss which ones you want. But my number one is still probably Survivor by Chuck Palahniuk. I just love that book. He's number 5 on my list with Fight Club, but Chuck Palahniuk is just probably my favorite author of all time. His books are always rereadable. There's so many good ones. And my number 2 would be Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton. He wrote Jurassic Park and a couple of other books that became movies, but Andromeda Strain, by far my favorite. That was just the most intense, and it was very timely for what we just went through. Where it's like, oh man, what are we going through over here? So that was number 2. Number 3, I put Those Guys Have All the Fun, the ESPN story. I don't know if you've read this or heard of this. It's a chunk of a book, but it's pretty much the history of ESPN and my love of sports and growing up with ESPN. I loved all that stuff. So that was a big one for me. And I remember reading that one when I was in Chicago on the subway and just kind of reading it, all the way through for about 3 months. It took me probably to get through it all. Loved every page of it. That was a good one. And then the 4th one, because I already said 5. Number 4 was Game of Thrones. Again, like the Song of Ice and Fire, whatever you want to call it, like that first book. Man, that book just has so much in it. It's got so much character development, and it really pulled me in. And I think I read the first 3 or 4, maybe 5. I don't remember at this point, before I kind of just fell out of books entirely. But yeah, I definitely think those are probably my top 5. So Survivor, Andromeda Strain, ESPN, Game of Thrones, and Fight Club.
Yeah, so obviously I've actually never read Fight Club. I've seen the movie a ton, but yeah, that would be a a good read. Did you see the movie first or read it first? Like, what was your exposure?
Saw the movie first. I know when it came out in theaters, I went and saw it with some friends of mine, and we just loved it. It was just like, wow, what was this? Like, what a mind trip! Like, man, I love that. So I went and immediately got the book because I was in a reading mode at the time, and I loved the book, and it just got me infatuated with him as a writer. And I think I read pretty much every book he had up to that point within a year. I would read the other 5 or 6 books he put out. And then every year or two when he puts out a new one, or used to be when he put out a new one, I'd read that immediately. Like I'd get it on opening day and read it that weekend. You know, like it was just, I couldn't put him down. So yeah, that book is significantly better than the movie, as they all are. But at the same time, the movie did a really good job of explaining that story. So it wasn't like it was vastly different. It just, the book had time to flesh it out more. But duh.
I mean, again, like whatever the original medium, like that's how that story is intended to be told, and everything else will never be the same exact intention, right, of the story. It's always from a different lens, different point of view, I guess, literally lens when we're talking cameras and films. So yeah, and just talk about the Andromeda Strain.
Andromeda Strain, yeah. So it's a book from, I want to say, the late 70s that Michael Crichton wrote. Okay. He was actually one of the few that I think I read Jurassic Park. Well, I saw the movie in '93 or whatever, but I read it years later, and I hadn't seen the movie in a while, and I was like, oh, I wonder if the book's any good. And I had read one of his other books, I think at the time, I want to say like Rising Sun or something. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize it was the same guy that wrote Jurassic Park. And so I read Jurassic Park, and that book is phenomenal as well. Way better than the movie. And it just sort of got me into that same mode. I was in high school, I think, at the time, and I was just like, all right, go in the library. What else you got? And the librarian, actually, I remember this very clearly. She recommended me that one. And it's really just about a virus that comes from outer space, kind of. It's not like like aliens thing. It just literally is. It's a virus that gets back on a probe that comes down from space. It's just something we haven't seen before. And it was a really interesting take on viruses and spreading and, communicable disease. And my mom's an epidemiologist, so I always heard about that stuff growing up. And so it just kind of hit at the right spot. And every time I read that book, I get pulled right back in, where I'm like, man, this is a good book. So yeah, I recommend that one. It's a pretty quick read for me anyway. It was a few times I've read it. So, but I really like that. But it is not for everyone. Maybe let's put it that way. It's a little bit sciencey more than his other ones.
Well, I will say, because the reason I brought it up was just talk about Crichton, right? And the comparison between the movies. I did feel like the book, because I've read it too, the Jurassic Park novel. I feel like as much as at night, dinosaurs and eating people and stuff like that. Like I felt the book had a darker tone to it. And like it's crazy that he was able to draw it out that much, and maybe from the movie, right, to still tell the essence of the story, but from that tone, much more optimistic in really all the movies. Which I guess it's funny. You're such an optimistic guy, but you love driving into the mediums that are a little darker.
Well, but at the same time, all of those movies end on an optimistic tone, right? Like Andromeda Strain, even like the book, and there is a movie of it, but like that story ends on like, we solved this, but we need to be careful that we don't do this again. Or, there's some cautious tale. And Jurassic Park is obviously the most, be careful kind of book there is, where it's like, maybe we should be careful with our science, and we, got to respect it a little bit more and take care of things. So I think all of them, and almost every single Michael Crichton book that there is the exact same format, which I kind of like. Like he wrote and kind of helped create ER, the TV show that I loved that back in the day, but it's pretty much the same for all of his books. There's an unknown person getting thrown into a situation. So that allows for all the exposition to come onto that person, and you're just writing along with that person. And so it just makes it really easy to digest. Like the format itself is a ton of exposition, but it all makes sense. You don't feel like you're ever being talked to. It's more of like, I'm learning as we go. And like Jurassic Park does a terrific job of that. And so by the end, you feel like you're a dinosaur expert. Right. So every book he writes, you feel like you're an expert on whatever that was. And he does that on purpose. He talks with experts and gets the way to, or I should say did, because he's no longer with us. But he was one of those authors that I could read every single one of his books. I knew kind of the format of it. And he kept to it to the point where I was like, okay, good. It's the same. I'm used to this. I'm familiar. I don't need to relearn anything. I can just learn what the novel is trying to tell me. And so I love that about him.
Awesome. And I mean, it's funny. We've talked a lot about books being translated to movies, and will translate to the next question. For top 5 movies,
I almost put Fight Club on here, but I'm like, that's not really fair. And then I almost put Jurassic Park, and I'm like, well, I kind of talked about Crichton. So like, I decided to go other movies. And again, I don't know if these are in order. I have a hard time ranking movies just because there's so many different ways to rank them. How do you define best? So my top 5 movies that can change in order at any minute, as of right now anyway, because I wrote them down so that I wouldn't change them. That's really the reason I did this. Shawshank Redemption. I can always watch that movie. Classic. It's such an optimistic ending. And a guy named Andy. Come on. Fifth Element. Love Fifth Element. It's got every kind of movie in one that I like. Just perfect. Avengers Endgame. It's just that one got me, right? Like that was one of those movies that I was just like, I hope they succeed, and it didn't feel like 3 hours. So I love that movie. Very different one here is Mean Girls. One of the best comedies I've ever seen. It holds up to this day. Every time I watch it, I find some new joke that I missed. And so I love that. Like, stop trying to make fetch happen and all that. It's just such a quotable movie. And then my last one is a new one. It's Parasite. And I watched it, I think it was a couple years ago. It was on a plane somewhere and I was able to watch it. And I came home and watched it immediately after. I was like, I rented it again. I'm like, that was so good. And I just love the way that movie is laid out. Again, very different than the others. But so those are my 5 for now. And that will probably change in an hour. But that's why I was like, I got to write these down because I'm just going to talk forever. But those are my 5.
I mean, Mean Girls, right? Like Tina Fey is brilliant writer. Like she's so funny, so intelligent. I've read her memoir book. That is,
I did too. Bossy Pants. Yeah.
The funniest memoir I've ever written, and it's just like every page I'm laughing. There's something clever. She just her way of thinking. So many
stories. Yeah, it's so great. Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly someone who writes so much comedy, when they talk about themselves, like, have no choice but to be funny. So
right, how do you not? And then again, it makes it entertaining because I'm expecting funny, and it is. So it kind of it pays off. But yeah, that's good stuff. No, and I think just again, Mean Girls is one of those. I always think back, like, what movies can I see on TV and catch it at any moment and just leave it on? That's usually for me. That's when I know it's a favorite of mine. And there's a few more than these 5, but Mean Girls, if I ever see that on, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm watching this. Like, no question. I just love that movie.
So movies are like wide receivers. There's just so many of them.
So many of them.
All right, so getting back to the games and the football. Top 5 game day foods.
Okay, I don't want to get into trouble. I know there's a lot of people that have opinions on this, but for me, any kind of chicken wing, whether it's drum or flat or boneless, I don't care. That's the number one. Every time. I love chicken wings. Any kind of sauce, I don't care. I'm not going to get specific. The hot, the sweet, the spicy, all of it. Chicken wings. Number 2, I go with French fries, which I think is an odd one, but I just love a good fry, like a good base. Maybe I'm alone on this, but I tend to have a couple of beers when I go to football games and watch football. So like, it's nice to have a solid base. So for me, that's like chicken and fries, like something solid that my stomach can hold on to. I like that. I do like a good nacho at a stadium. I'll specifically say that. I don't get nachos at B-dubs or anything like that, but if I'm at a stadium, that little plastic tub with the cheese with the skin on it, there's just something about that. It just screams game day for me. So I like that one in the specific context of where I'm talking about. So nachos are on there. I do like a good pretzel too. Speaking of at the stadium, I love a good warm, like soft pretzel, with the right kind of mustard or the right kind of cheese, again, in stadium only. And then I think, and maybe this is cheating, but like any kind of dip, anything I can take a chip and dip into that's not necessarily nachos and cheese, that's bland and obvious, but like a chili dip or a queso dip or like some sort of variety where you homemade dip, right? Like if I'm going to a buddy's house to watch the game and he's got like a good chili dip, phenomenal. Buffalo chicken dip, phenomenal. Like all that stuff. I love a good dip. So those are my 5, but again, that can change between now and Sunday.
Yeah, whatever food's in front of me, that's what I'm eating.
I almost said that, actually. I almost was like, I don't even need to rank this. Just what do you got? I'll take that. Yeah, but no, I feel like that's not really doing it service. I do have to put 5 together. So there you go.
All right, and so the things we like, right? What we enjoy. We certainly enjoy Incubus. Again, back to the Incubus references in the titles. So maybe let's inform people a little bit about what Incubus is, because I know I was on the 2 Point Conversion, another show on the Going for Two Live network, and Gladys did ask. I was fortunate to be on with Jennifer Eakins from 4 for 4. So
nice.
It was pretty awesome to talk with her for the first time, and big fan of her and her work, and so that was. Yeah. So that was pretty awesome in itself. And then we talked a little bit about the fishbowl, and I spoke a little bit about Incubus. But I know for both of us, I think it was neither of our first choices, but those bands that we ultimately really, really love didn't end up being on the list. And I guess when you're looking through the list, there was a few names, like I love Pink Floyd. But ultimately I chose Incubus just because I've seen them and really love that show. That was one of the best shows I've ever been to. So what was your reasoning behind choosing Incubus, and maybe how did you first fall in love with Incubus and find their music?
Yeah, so it's so many stories in Incubus for me, but I think my first choice was Live. The band Live has always been a fan of me, I guess, and it just hits me at the right time. They have all the different kinds of music. They've been around since the mid '90s, and I just felt like that's my band. And I put that in along with Dream Theater. I think were the two that I selected when you could type them in. And then neither one of them made the list, and I was like, "That's not shocking." Dream Theater, especially, they're a progressive metal band that I think 18 people in the world know about, so I'm not shocked at that. But I was like, I might as well try. But I was kind of shocked that Live didn't make it, and for some reason, my next thought was then like, well, okay, well if Live didn't make it, who else would I go with? Who else would I stand for? Right? Like, who else am I a big fan of? And Incubus was the obvious choice for me. I've seen them a few times. I'm a huge fan of their band. I have a bunch of their albums from back in the day when I used to do that kind of thing and buy CDs. I don't even have a CD player anymore, which is hilarious. But yeah, so I loved Incubus way back in the day, and I became a fan of theirs actually right when Make Yourself came out. I remember I was in the car with my buddy, and Pardon Me came on, and I was just like, man, this sounds. I like the vibe of this. It's got like a DJ with, it's got like, it's rock, but it's kind of melodic. Like it hit me the right way. And I think, I don't know, a week or two later, we were at Virgin Records, and I don't know if people remember these things called record stores where you could actually go in and talk to people about music. It was the craziest thing. I don't think they have them anymore, really, which is a shame. But Virgin had this specific thing where they actually had like new CDs that you could go up and like listen to them, and it would play like a minute of each track. Like you couldn't just stand there and listen to the whole thing. But the one that we went to, and when I lived in Columbus, I was at Easton Mall, and they had probably 15 or 20 of these stations that each had 4 CDs at them, and Make Yourself was at one of these things, and I was like, oh, perfect. Let me go see if I like that song still and what else is on it. And I remember just really quickly hitting next because every single song was like, oh, that sounds good. Yep, I like that one. Yep, I like that one. I bought it that day, right? And I'm like, I'm doing this. And then from there, it was just kind of, it got out of hand. And I think that the next thing I went to is, well, Science is still out and come out like a year or two before. And I got that, and I'm like, oh my God, this thing is even crazier. Like these guys go even more nutty on this album. Like they're just way off the rails. And I loved Science. So Pardon Me was kind of like the song that got me in. And then Make Yourself was the album that got me in. And then Science is where I was like, that's what I'm looking for. So like, that's kind of where I was in time. And, I was in high school at the time, right? So wherever you are when you're 13 is who you are for the rest of your life, is what they sometimes say, right? And so that's kind of where it was. It just hit me at the right time. But yeah, I loved Incubus, and I saw them a bunch of times in the 90s and 2000s. I think I even saw them in 2012, I want to say, was the last show I went to, but and it's drawn a blank. But yeah, great show live, for sure.
And I think, part of the appeal of the song Pardon Me in particular, like Brandon and his different vocal styles, right? He's basically rapping the verses, very long held notes, really well sustained loud voice in the choruses, and watching him live, and I saw them, I think it was 2018, and one of maybe the most impressive singer I've ever seen live.
Yeah, he's still got it. Yeah, for sure. It's impressive.
Apparently self-taught. Apparently, I was reading he took one lesson, and then the rest he figured out on his own. So
I kind of believe that, though. He just seems like that kind of guy that's just naturally talented, right? Oh, what a lucky dude.
And I also think, again, write a lot of lyrics about this, but he's kind of like the beat of his own drum type guy. Like he doesn't want to necessarily be told what to do.
Yeah. Well, and he doesn't need to be, but at the same time, when you've got that kind of talent, it's sort of up to you to tell others what to do almost, right? Where it's like, no, I got this. I like that. And he's confident about it, but he's not a jerk about it. There's that thin line. I like that about him.
You see, I feel that way about Rodgers, where he's incredibly cocky and confident, but he doesn't go over the line. Although I know lately a lot of people.
The last 12 months, he's been over the line a couple times in my book, but not like stepping, like not launching over, just like towing over, and be like, all right. So yeah, he's getting there.
But it's funny because Brandon Boyd, singer of Incubus, but I think he also does like voiceovers on documentaries and stuff, like just a natural voice for anything.
I think so. Yeah, I don't know if I've heard any of that, but I've heard that he does it. Yes.
My introduction to Incubus was actually back to fantasy. Yahoo, I believe that was the first site I ever used for fantasy. I remember Yahoo Music used to be a thing. Play music videos and shuffle through almost like a Spotify, where okay, this is what I want to listen to, but then they'd take you to something else. And I remember one of the random ones was the Incubus music video for Warning. And like that,
very nice.
The video got me, but like I was also like, man, this song is awesome. Who's this band? And then I saw the video for Drive, and I was like, oh wow, like visually, this band is like super impressive. But then like I'm also loving the music. And then just I remember the first Incubus album I got was Light Grenades, and so like, that's kind of like, so again, 2005, 2006, the period I was really started heavily listening to them. So the last two parts of the high fives, we're still in the high five section, folk. So we got top 5 Incubus albums and top 5 Incubus songs. I put them in that order, but if you want to do songs first, again, you're the guest, so the guest gets their way. So let's hear it. Let's hear all about Incubus.
I'll do albums and then zoom in because I think you're going to see a theme. It's pretty obvious. But yeah, Science is number 1. That one still just it gets my juices flowing. Like I can put that on wherever I am and just get ramped up right back again like I was in high school, which is great. 2 is Make Yourself because again, it just in that same milieu, like that's where my mind was at the time. Those are the ones that got me going. Light Grenades, very easily number 3. I love that one. I love Light Grenades. Morning View, I put number 4, and I love Morning View. There's a lot of good songs on there, but it just was almost too calm for me. Like I really wanted them to follow up and do something crazy big, and they didn't. But I love that they didn't. If that makes sense. Like I didn't get what I wanted, but I didn't mind that. Where I was like, okay, I see what you're doing here. That you're just showing your breadth, and I like that. And then my last one is Fungus Among Us, which is their first one, which is just crazy. And it's just sort, like you would imagine any sort of local band puts together a CD and kind of puts it out. It's very raw, very unrefined. Some of the songs wound up on Science, and you can tell. But I just put that one on there kind of as an honorable mention, just because that thing is just. If you can get a hold of it or listen to it on YouTube or whatever, I recommend it. Anybody who likes Incubus, I think it's worth doing. There are some interesting threads in there. You can see kind of where they were just finding their footing, and I loved it. I thought it was really raw, but really good. So those are my 5. The later stuff, like Crow Left to the Murder and 8, and what was the other one? The one where he's walking on the tightrope. I can never remember the name of that album.
If not now when. Such a long name. That's why.
But those albums are great. But I didn't get into them at the time. Like I was already, I was older maybe, or I was off. I didn't need new Incubus. I had the old stuff still playing, right? Whereas like I didn't need new stuff. I was still rocking out to Science. So yeah, nothing against their other albums, but those earlier ones just sort of just hit me.
Because I mean, if you look at Andrew and my Twitter pictures, you could probably tell which our favorite Incubus albums are, because mine is If Not Now When, and his is Science, and that's how our images line up. So yeah. I have Make Yourself at number 2, though. Not that I normally give my top 5. So like Tyreek Hill, the consistency of number 2 to number 2, we apparently Make Yourself. Yeah. So then but no, we'll go to your top 5 songs now.
Well, I do want to hear some of yours, so don't feel free to interject. I think that this is worthy. We're Incubus fans. We can talk about this.
All right. So if I had to go 1 for albums, it'd be If Not Now When, Make Yourself 2. Probably say I'd reverse your 3 and 4. I'd go Morning View 3, Light Grenades 4. It's tough between Science and 8, because I mean 8's the tour I saw them on, so I've got an extra little attachment. They played a lot of songs off that. The song Glitter Bomb, that one really gets me. It showed that they could still make stuff. So yeah, I think I'll give it just to maybe make everyone happy. I'll give it a co-5 between Science and 8.
We'll take it. We'll allow it.
8, it's kind of like the Infinity, and that's just something to do with Science. They're related. They're both Incubus albums. That's how they're related more closely. But we'll get to top 5 favorite songs.
Yeah, so for me, number 1 is I Miss You. That song just hits me like in the right way. And I think it just does a really good job. The way he holds that note and everything, like just, it's so emotional. So I love that song, even though it's not like a rocker. I put Love Hurts was number 2 from Light Grenades. That song, again, I can listen to that over and over. Whenever it comes on, it just feels right. Number 3 was Certain Shade of Green. That one, again, just takes me way back. And then On Science also is New Skin. I just, again, love those 2 songs. Like there's a dozen songs on that album, and every single one of them is a banger to me. But those 2 just have a special place in my heart. So they're technically 3 and 4 just because of the way the ranking is. But that still makes it my favorite album because it's, the top of the top. And then number 5, I put Pardon Me. I know that it's kind of like a cliche or whatever, but that's the one that got me in. That's the first song I heard of theirs. That was where I got kind of introduced to the band. So it just holds some sentimental value. And I'm putting it 5, kind of to put it on there as like, I have to put something on there that reminds me of who they are, who they were when I started. And I think Pardon Me is their epitome song. It's the one everybody knows. It's the one that kind of, put them on the map. So for me, it needs to be on this list. If I'm going to say best, it may not be, it's my favorite, but it also was popular enough for me to hear it, and I respect that. Like that got me into them.
Yeah, because like you're saying, like Make Yourself was their first big album that really got popular. Like Science, like incredible album, but just didn't really have the commercial traction.
Yeah, didn't hit. Yeah, I think Certain Shade of Green, and there's a couple other ones on there that were kind of singles, but were just not quite right for the market. But when Pardon Me came out, it just filled that void perfectly. And so, yeah, I think that's why, again, Make Yourself is my number 2, because that one I can listen to front to back. Like that album, there's so few of those anymore where you can just put it on and let it go. And If Not Now When is actually one of those too. It's not in my top 20 albums of all time or anything, but it's a good one start to finish. 8 has a little bit of, there's some slow points in it for me, and I'm not a huge fan of, but again, this doesn't mean I'm hating. It just didn't hit me. But yeah, I think, again, Like Grenades, that one's Animali on there. Oh my God, that one's almost in my top 5. Like, just there's so many good songs that they have. So yeah, huge fan of Incubus. Glad we met up from that. And I know there were a few others in our chat that were just, big Incubus fans too. But I love that about Scott putting this together. And you can kind of find some different niches in there that no one ever knew we had. So I'm a huge fan of this.
Mm-hmm. And so quickly, I'll share my top 5 Incubus songs.
Please do, yeah.
So at number 5, I've got Aqueous Transmission, and they actually played it live. So Mike Enzinger had the pipa with him, that was pretty sweet to see. And the concert in Toronto kind of started to rain as their set came on. So Aqueous Transmission was the closer, so I was soaking wet. So I really felt that song, because that's floating on the river, right? And
trying to get just keeping the vibe going, keeping it like the wet and all that. Like it's trying to it's almost like a rain calling song. So I love that.
I actually enjoyed the fact that I was soaking wet, and I luckily it was the middle of summer, so it's not too cold. But yeah, I definitely got a greater appreciation seeing it live.
I'll bet, yeah.
Number 4, I'll put a song off of Like Grenades. It's Dig.
Dig is great. Yes.
And tremendous guitar work there. Like just the extra delay on the guitar. I love Ben Kenny's melodic bass line. Like I am, as much as the original bass player Alex. Can't think of his last name. Dirk Lance. Everyone knows him mostly by.
Like that, yeah.
I love all the slapping, like Speak Free off Fungus Among Us. Incredible, amazing. But
so reggae feel to it, like just a wailing on it, yeah.
But Ben Kenny, man, like his bass line's always so melodic. I think I appreciate that more, and maybe that's why I get more partial to If Not Now When, Like Grenades. But Dig, I think Dig has everything. It's got the bass line, it's got the guitar parts, and I play guitar as well, and I actually figured out a good way to kind of do that all acoustically too. And I know, Pardon Me, I think that the original popularity of Pardon Me actually came from an acoustic version they did live at a big LA radio station. I think that's actually what gained them traction. And then once that became that acoustic single became popular, then they kind of then the actual single sort of took off from there. So it's Incubus and acoustic guitar and that nature has always kind of been attached. So I was able to kind of manufacture my own way to do it with Dig. So I've always kind of appreciated that I was able to kind of deconstruct it and find a good way to play that riff acoustically.
Very nice.
So number 3, it's In the Company of Wolves off If Not Now When. And I think just an incredible guitar riff, great guitar solo to end. And I think the way that song transforms, again, starting off very acoustic, but then, middle you get to and I like that it's not structured just verse, chorus, verse, chorus. It was really like A section, B section. Like you got this first start and that had kind of verse, chorus feel. And then you get to a point, this guitar riff, and it just suddenly changes the entire song.
I feel like that's completely. Like 3 songs in one when I listen to it. Like I feel like it's the same track. Oh, okay, cool. Like, I just expect it to be multiple because it kind of flows into each other really well, but they are very cohesive and still different, which I like. Yeah, I'm with you.
Back to another band I almost chose for the Scott Fishbowl, Radiohead. My favorite song by them is Paranoid Android, and it's that exact same thing. Yeah. I love classical music. I love the idea of not necessarily needing one big the same structure over and over again. But that said, my number 2 song is that verse chorus structure. It's The Warmth off of Make Yourself. Yeah. And I think lyrically,
the beginning of that is so good. I just love the way that he just kind of gets into it. I love that. Like the way that it kind of vibes into it. Oh yeah.
I've always appreciated Mike Enzinger, like the effects on the guitar, right? Like he just makes the guitar sound so different every single song. And again, like Dig, another song, use of the delay, right? Use of the echo.
Yep.
And then I love how at the end of the song, in the last chorus, he brings the riff in distorted. And I just think that when I hear that riff come in at the end of the song, it's just like, that's a pump up for sure.
See, I always use the term, it's like it's upside down, which doesn't make any sense, but it has such a different vibe, but it's the same song. I know what you mean. I love the ending of that. It's almost like the start of it is this way and then it kind of turns, and I like that twist to it. Yeah, for sure.
I know that the lyrics, don't let the world bring you down, not everyone here is that messed up and cruel, I won't swear. I remember there's times when I wasn't feeling so good or feeling a little down, and listening to that actually like legit lifted me up. I actually felt happier listening to that song. So I always appreciated
Same here.
that.
No, I definitely identified with that one too. And that one might have been in my top 5 if you asked me on a sad day, but I'm in a positive mode right now. But that's one that I, every now and then when it like comes on the iPod or something, like it just comes on Spotify or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, it's still got the heat to it. So yeah, I know what you mean. That's a good song for sure.
It's funny that your positive mood, though, your favorite song is "I Miss You," and your next one is "Love Hurts." Right?
Well, yeah, but at the same time, like those stick with me. You know what I mean? Like those are the ones that I can listen to over and over and over, and not because of the message, but just it sort of transports me back, right? And so, like when I hear the warmth, I get transported back to more of a not a sad version of me, but like it's in a different. I'm in a different pocket then. When like with "Love Hurts" and "Miss You," like those are songs that I remember more live, like you were talking about, like seeing in concert that kind of trigger something, a different positive memory for me, where it's like a shared experience. Like I remember singing "I Miss You" with everyone in the audience and just like enjoying the hell out of that moment. So like that song that's why it's there. Right. But like I definitely did that with the warmth. I think I heard that at least the first show, if I'm not mistaken. And it was great too. But that one was a different pocket the first time. Like that sticks with me in a different way. But I love that about music. I actually was on a Shane Swagger's show, and we talked a little bit about Incubus and SFB and kind of just the Superflex Super Show and all that kind of stuff. It was in the Superflex City, I think is what it was. Man, I'm drawing a blank. He's going to kill me. But now that was a great show because we talked about music in general and how it can kind of change your mindset and like put you in a different space, and you can listen to it later and go right back to that mindset. Like it's so weird that music can do that. You can hear a song that you haven't heard for 20 years and you're right back in your car driving to work, and you're just like, whoa, like it transports you right back. So I love that. And that's why, yes, those are more of like heartbreak songs, but for me, they're positive songs. But anyway, you still had at least one more, right?
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting. I was going to get to that because you talk about the live, right? Like I could see why if, you with, 10,000, 20,000 other people singing "I Miss You," all at the same time, that would probably give me chills, right? So I could definitely see why you've chosen to like associate that with your number one. But unfortunately, on the 8 tour, again, they played a lot off 8. They didn't actually play the warmth. I kind of expected them not to play "In the Company of Wolves." Like, okay, like that's not really that popular song. But like, I was a little disappointed they didn't play the warmth. However, with my wife, they played "If Not Now When," and that was actually our first song at our wedding. So like that's my number one song, and talk about Brandon Boyd as a singer, him singing that live, and that's like "I Miss You," another song with long sustained held notes, and like I've heard that song enough, and like he did it exactly like on the album, like just like
nice.
that type of vocal sustain isn't studio trickery, like that's his voice. He can do that live, and it's so
at
incredible.
Volume
impressive.
too. It's not like he's whispering it; he's belting it in most cases, and it just I love it. Good choice. And but I haven't seen any of their later stuff live. Like the last tour, I feel like the last tour I was on was 2010, 2012. I think it was Crow Left to the Murder, something around there, if I recall. And even then, like I don't even know if I saw the whole show. Like I feel like we ran late or we had parking issues or something, so I ended up missing like the first 4 or 5 songs, which really upset me. But it was just like one of those days, like I just wasn't in the right mindset or something. And so like that show didn't ring as true. And we were in seats way in the back, which is always different too, right? So like all these different contextual things to seeing a concert, change and play and all there. But I would love to go see them again. And I think it'd be really cool if our whole division was able to meet up for an Incubus concert at some point. I think that would be awesome.
All right, so everyone in the SFB Incubus division, the challenge is there. We'll
figure that one out.
Yeah, I mean, if Scott Fish could figure out how to get 1,900 people in the same league, I think they figure out 12 individuals getting to an Incubus concert. I'm sure. Yeah. Oh no, we have to go watch Incubus live. Oh darn.
Oh wow, that's a shame. I'm okay with it. It'd just be tough.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Logistically, because. Maybe the thing is everyone see them on that tour, right? Like everyone pick their city and like, if you manage to get to the same concert, that's great. We can kind of share the experience of that concert tour.
Just being on the tour. Yeah, that'd be cool. When are they touring next? They sure probably are. Anyway, we can get into that.
Yeah. Okay. Incubus research needing to come up. Research, right? I know PJ, I think if PJ Kennedy's still listening, they always talk about that on the show that'll be on tomorrow. Speak on it, right? They're always looking for research there. But anyway, yeah. So
outside the box, but I like it.
But press coverage. That's this show here. And again, the guest today was Andrew Hall. Andrew, really appreciate you joining for all this football talk and some football talk, like a lot of Incubus talk lately, which is always great.
No, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I think it's always good to remind ourselves that we're not just fantasy people. We're not just computers, pumping out content and having opinions. It's like we are people with different, diverse interests and hobbies, and we're all meat sacks trying to do our best to get through this life, And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that. And I don't think anybody in the fantasy industry is 100% one thing. And so it's always good to remind ourselves that like we all have different things. And I love Scott for doing that, because even just putting music as the thing this year, last year I think it was toys, right? And so a lot of people were kind of picking their toys based on this and all that. And it was great and it was awesome. And then the year before that was video games. And so it's like, again, it's another way for us to connect and another way for us to kind of share experiences. So, I mean, again, any way to do that with or without fantasy is always a positive, right? We only have so much time and our relationships are important. So I do think this is a great way to do it. Talking about music, always a fan.
Awesome. And again, follow you on Twitter at Andrew Hall FF. Easy for me because it's on the screen, so I can read it off pretty easily without messing up. But yeah, again, at Fantasy Pros, Football Network, Dynasty Junkies. For if you enjoyed this live show, that's a Dynasty Junkies live on YouTube as well. And
Yep.
Bit more fantasy focused, less Syncubus every episode, I'm sure.
Yeah, we do a lot of dynasty discussion, and we do a segment that I really like, that I really want people to know about because I think it's unique. It's a Find Me a Trade. And so what we do on that is we actually have people send us their team and their league, and we go and look at all the other teams in the league and say, all right, well, what trade would I make if it were my team? And so whoever we have on and whoever's the host and all that, we put together some trade options, and most of the time they don't happen that way, right? We don't have all the context. But we've had a lot of times. I know I used one of my own teams in there a couple weeks ago, and it was like it helped me because I hadn't thought of things. And sometimes we all get kind of stuck where we feel like you can't get a trade done, and it's like, well, what's the point? And this is the kind of the slow part of the year anyway. Kind of leading up into August, a lot of people don't make changes. But I love the idea of like helping others find a trade and being specific to someone's league, and not just saying, oh, go trade for XYZ. It's like, no, you have this player, I would trade away for this player. I would make a specific thing, and I just love that we get that detailed with our listeners. So anytime, I always say this, anytime you have a trade question, anytime you want us to help you out, send a DM to Dynasty Junkies, send a DM to me. We can get you on the list. And we are looking for more teams. So if anyone out there is looking for something and kind of curious on how we can help their Dynasty team, we love doing that. But hit us up.
Awesome. And again, press coverage here. You can check out everything on Going for Two, including all the written content. Twitter at Going4_2. I know I'll start doing some DFS content soon, whether it's going to be CFL DFS. I know Yahoo DFS. Like I know they've got their own. I know a lot of it's DraftKings, FanDuel, different platforms, but Yahoo still has their own DFS stuff. So I've been writing an article for Going for Two last few years, specifically about the Yahoo DFS format. So I kind of like going with the niches that not a lot of people are covering. And Canadian, I love the CFL, so I watch a lot of games. So I get a. It's better. That's probably the where I'm most qualified to talk about DFS, just because it seems like that's where I've had the most success DFS. So I mean, CFL season's only about I think it's like 9 days away. So look for that article soon. I have to write that soon. Pressure right now. No pressure, but yeah, that'll be coming soon. But again, Going for Two live network. Always got great content. I know tomorrow, Tuesday, July 3rd, you'll have Speak on It, as well as the Devi Royale. I'll be back on the Dynasty Game on Thursday, the Armchair Show right now every Wednesday, and then in season they'll morph Wednesdays and Fridays. Already mentioned the DFS show with Gerson, one of the viewers today. Again, thanks, G.
The real G, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so next Monday, Gladys will be hosting the 2-point conversion. I'll be back the week after that. And yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Senra Says. Again, Andrew, really appreciate you coming on. This is a great conversation. Really loved it.
Always a pleasure. I'm welcome to be on anytime you have me. I'll be glad. It'll be great.
All right. And on behalf of Andrew, again, Kyle Senra here signing off. This was